Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 95. As has become the custom, let's begin with something of Inyana Diyema, relevant to our time. We're coming from Teives. In 2 days will be Teives, which is one of the 4 fasts described in Tanakh, the 4 fasts that are connected, 3 of them to the Beis HaMikdash and the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, Teives being the first. Because on this day, as he says in Yecheskel and other books, is the day when Nebuchadnezzar in the first temple placed a siege around the wall of Jerusalem, a motzer. Sometimes the expression used is Samach Melech Bovel, which essentially is like put a lien, or you can say a siege on the city, which would then lead ultimately to the breach of the wall on Shivasar B'Tammuz, the 17th of Tammuz, a number of months later, and 3 weeks later, of course, to the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. In Tavshin Lamed Ches, the year after the Rebbe had the heart attack, so as is custom by the Rebbe, everything that was so-called a negative turned into a positive. And that year, the Rebbe was Mechadish, renewed, as he called it, the custom of saying Divrei Kfushin, which are words of Isedus, words of inspiration. That was the custom to be said on the day of the Tanis on a fast. So it's interesting, in that year, Tavshin Lamed Ches, when it seemingly there was an element of a void to some extent, the seat of the Rebbe was empty during the Simchas Torah, and subsequently the Farbrengens were all coming from the room Mitzvah Shabbos until Yutas Kislev, when the Rebbe, Rosh Chodesh Kislev, the Rebbe went home, and then Yutas Kislev was the first Farbrengen back in 770. So, seemingly very characteristic of that, that's what the Rebbe took Asara B'Teives and turned that, and started taking Divrei Kfushin, and of course, with the central theme of Yehavchi Yom Meil L'Sasnu L'Simcha, which is again from the verses in Nach, and the Rambam brings at the end of Hilchos Tanius, which means that these days should be transformed from days of sadness and days of mourning and grief to days of joy and great celebration, as it will be when Mashiach comes. As the Rebbe explains, because within the negative energy of these days really lies a far greater, deeper kayach, deeper power that we have to reveal through the tshuva we do and through the inspiration, and that is a result of the catalyst of this so-called difficult days, turns it into and reveals it ultimately into becoming great holidays. One of the themes of Asara B'Teives, of course, is the fact that in some Sforim it says that Avud Raham, and the Rebbe brings that in the Sikh of Tavshin Lamed Ches. The Rebbe spoke that year both the night of Asara B'Teives and also the day of Asara B'Teives, 2 Sikhs and a Maimer. And that was the beginning, as I said, of the custom that from then on the Rebbe would speak on all fast days, obviously except Yom Kippur, but all fast days, and the Tisha B'Av also usually not, except Tavshin Nun Aleph, when the Rebbe spoke by Mincha, also a very classic Sikha. So Asara B'Teives, the theme Tavshin Lamed Ches, was exactly this. He brings from the Avud Raham, a very fascinating thing, because it says Be'etzem Hayem Hazeh on Asara B'Teives, similar to the Be'etzem Hayem Hazeh and Yom Kippur. So we derive from this that if Asara B'Teives would come out on Shabbos, it would be Deicha Shabbos. No fast day has that power, not even Tisha B'Av, only Yom Kippur. Now the thing is, because according to the calculations, Asara B'Teives cannot come out, practically speaking, on a Shabbos, but in Inyan, conceptually, if it did come out, it would have that power. And of course the question is why? How is Asara B'Teives, the 10th of Teives, harsher to the point that it is more powerful than Shabbos itself, even more than Tisha B'Av? So the obvious reason, as the Rebbe explains there, this is printed the Hesofis of L'Kutei Sichos Chelik Chof, the end of volume 20, the back there, all the Sichos that the Rebbe spoke that period, starting from the night of Simchas Torah, the night, end of Simchas Torah, and then Shabbos Mitzvah, Shabbos Bereshis, and Noach, and Lech Lecha, and so on, and says, the simple reason is because this was the beginning, so-called, of the end, unfortunately. This opened the door. Had there not been the Samach Melech Bavel, had there not been the siege, the rest of the events wouldn't have happened. So even though Tisha B'Av is, of course, the saddest day on the calendar, because that's when that destruction actually happened, but the opening, when did it begin? When was there the so-called the vulnerability? It was exposed on a Asara B'Teives, and that's why it has that power. What does this mean in personal service, in our Veda, and in the context of applied Chassidus? It means that what is the wall around Yerushalayim? Yerushalayim is Yirah Shalom. It means complete faith, complete awe. Yirah Shalom. The two parts of the name that, as Yerushalayim developed over the years, first it was Yirah and then it was Shalom, then it came together, Yirah and Shalom. So complete awe. But in order for a person in this material world to be able to have awe of God, and with all the challenges of the material existence and our needs for survival and self-interest, we need to have a wall around Yerushalayim. We create a fence, we create a gate, we create so-called safeguards to protect the fragile and protect the purity and the innocence. Just like we do for children, we don't just let them go anywhere they like. We create many safeguards to protect them from this hostile world. In this context is siyog l'teira. And the breach of the wall, that begins the beginning of all the problems. Because the Yetzer Hara, as the Rebbe says, there comes and tells you, God forbid, do not to do our mitzvah or to do a certain sin. Then a person is very obvious that that's something that's inappropriate, he won't do it. But he says, you know what? Only touch upon, only the wall, only something that's only a siyog, it's a safeguard. What's the big thing? But as soon as you let down that safeguard, that's when the ball starts rolling, and the domino and ripple effect of medechi el dechi, a person doesn't wander and get lost in the woods overnight. It takes step by step. And this is true psychologically. It's a tremendous lesson. You don't wait until a disease or a problem has become so full-blown that you can't deal with it any longer. You try to nip it in the bud. That's why preventive medicine is the best, and psychological health. That one has that psychological health preventively is the most powerful way to preempt issues. So when you see a problem in a life, you don't wait till it becomes, you say, you know what, I'll wait till the fire starts blazing. No. As soon as there's some type of issue, always better to be safe than sorry. Be cautious is to nip it in the bud, and that's what Asara B'Teives captures. The idea we don't wait till the walls are breached, until until Jerusalem gets destroyed, God forbid. As soon as there's some type of siege, even someone's even challenging, just the mere fact that they're challenging the structure of your life, the structure that you've built up. So you don't wait till they break into your walls. As soon as they besiege the walls, you're ready to respond. And psychologically, as I said, that's a tremendous lesson in health and in well-being, especially when it comes to children who are far more vulnerable and innocent and fragile than adults. But everyone, you don't wait till things get to a point where it's very, very difficult to mend. And you could see many, many issues, and I could testify to this, and I'm sure you can as well. Many issues really become much more problematic because there was a cover-up, there was silence, there was minimizing, there was denial, there was a avoidance, because nobody likes confrontation. And then by the time you address it, it's already spread to the point where it's no longer been contained. You see, the first thing when you're in an emergency, someone's brought into the emergency room, the first thing is you have to contain the bleeding. You have to stop the bleeding so to be able to identify where the problem is. If you don't do that, the problem begins to spread, and you can't even say, where's the problem? What's the difference between the symptom and the root, which is so fundamental when it comes to healing. They tell that story about, even though I try not to bring stories that are outside of the context of Chassidus, but I think this captures it well, the Chelem analogy, where a guy was looking for his keys at night, and he couldn't find his keys. The neighbor comes by and says, what are you looking for? He says, my keys, let me help you look. And he says, where did you lose them? Let's retrace the steps. Where did you lose them? So he points 100 yards away. So he says, so why are you looking here? He says, because here's where the light is shining. So this is a classic example where people look for problems, not where the problem is, where the light is shining, where it's convenient. The problem is usually in a place where you have a blind spot where you don't want to look. And that's the Asara B'Teives, the beginning of the trouble. You try to nip it in the bud. So that's one lesson. Of course, also connected to Parsha Vayechi, which is the end of Sefer Bereshis. So Chassidus brings Teres Chaim specifically, and the Rebbe cites it, Sefer HaYoshar. It's called Sefer HaYoshar Bereshis because it's the Sefer of the Yesharim, which is Avram, Yitzchak, Yankov, of course, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. So Chassidus explains beautifully why Sefer Bereshis is different than all the other Svarim. Because you'll see it covers almost 2,000 years from Adam HaRish, from the creation of the world, Adam and Chava, all the way to the passing of Yaakov and the Shvatim. And Sefer Shmos begins Ve'ele Shmos Bnei Yisrael, the descent and the beginning of Golus Mitzrayim, the exile. So, and then from there on, the rest of the Torah covers 40 years from the time they leave Mitzrayim. Golus Mitzrayim is 210 years. But that's basically Shmos and Ve'era. In the middle of Parsha Boy is when the Jews leave Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh, they leave Mitzrayim. And the rest of the Torah is 40 years, which seems very, very disproportionate. Hold to 40 years, the 40 years of their traveling from the time they left Mitzrayim until they reach Eretz Yisrael, the 40 years in the wilderness. So Teres Chaim, that Mittler Rebbe explains, because Sefer HaYosher, Sefer Bereshis is like the foundation, it's the blueprint of Kol HaTorah Kula, of the entire Torah. So you first lay the foundation of the blueprint, and then it plays itself out in real life, so to speak, from Shmos and on. There's real life and lessons, and multiple lessons from the Ovis and everything in Sefer Bereshis, but it's still the formative structure, relatively speaking. In the language of Chassidus is how Atzilus lays out the structure of all of Ishtalshalus. And then is the entry into Biyah, where you get into the real nitty-gritty of the purpose of existence, Golus Mitzrayim, Mitzrayim from the word Mitzarim v'Gvulim, reflecting the limitations. Meitzar Gvul. Similar to the idea of Samach Melech Bavel, that what did he do? A siege is a type of constriction. So this is when we enter into the real world, so to speak, relatively speaking, empowered with the resources that we receive in Sefer Bereshis. So even though Sefer Bereshis also has Avram's descent to Mitzrayim, and you have Yaakov's descent, of course, but it's still on a level that is more on the level of Atzilus, language of the Mittler Rebbe. The real life that begins, the real struggles begin once the Jews enter into the true oppression of Golus Mitzrayim. So in Parsha Vayechi, as we conclude Sefer Bereshis, we say Chazak v'Chazak v'Niz Chazek. There's a fascinating sikh in Tov Shemem Zayin, where the Rebbe explains why Yaakov Davke went to Eretz Yisrael and went to be buried in Israel, but Yosef remains in Egypt, and compares it to the Frierdiker Rebbe, because Yosef is the interface between Yaakov and Biyah, because Yaakov is Teferes, Atzilus, that comes after Chesed and Gvura of Avram and Yitzchak. And Yosef is Yisod, that enters into Malchus, and Malchus enters into Biyah. Biyah is B'yuri Yitzir Asiyah, the world of Mitzrayim, and that's why Yosef remained there, to give Jews the hope and the faith and the strength that should they ever have questions or doubts or the difficulties in the difficult goals, they'll know that Tzomas Yosef are with them, and Yosef's vow that he has his brothers take a vow that they will, when they leave Egypt, their children and grandchildren, and make sure to also return with his and bring his bones back where he's buried in Shechem. As a result, that gave the strength of the Eden in Biyah to be able to have that promise that Yosef, that the Yosef stays with them in Golus and doesn't go to Eretz Yisrael. And the Rebbe explained that the Frierdiker Rebbe, the oil is not in Eretz Yisrael, but is specifically in America, in Chatzi Kadra Tachten, similar to the Yosef of our generation, meaning the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Yosef, compared to Yosef of that generation, who was, of course, the viceroy of Egypt, and that gave the strength to the. So basically, it comes down to this: we all have our challenges on a personal and a collective level, and Asara Teives and Vayechi teach us that no matter what challenges we have, there's the strength that we always have given the strength to deal with any challenge, and we have the Rebbe with us in our Golus, not just from a distance, but something that can give us strength while we go through the last steps, the last moments of of the challenging Golus, each in our own way. And knowing that fully well that within it all lies, as I said, embedded the deeper great holiday and celebration of Yehavcha Yom Meil L'Sasun L'Simcha L'Moedim Teiv. With that said, let's move into one follow-up, and then we'll continue with some new questions. So here's some feedback regarding the discussion the previous weeks about copying or mimicking the Rebbe. I spoke about the lessons from Rav Kahana, given the Nofik Mepumid of Rav Kahana, so his student learned from that, and I discussed that at length. So a few sources that some people pointed out. One is from Igris Kedish, the Rebbe's Letters, Volume 2, page 31, dated Gimel Teives Tavshin Tes, and the Rebbe says strong words that I'll translate. due to the greatest kashrus and the importance and preciousness, especially when you're not physically in the same place with the Rebbe, we have to strengthen and intensify and reinforce all the directives and minhagim v'tnuasayim, the customs and even the moves, tnuasayim, which means the actual actions, the way the Rabbeim behaved, those that are shaykh to us, except those that are relevant only to the Nasi himself. So that's nice, in addition to what I discussed. And additionally, the sikha of Yudalad Kislev Tafshin Yudalad was 25 years from the Rebbe's anniversary. So it's a classic sikha, Shabbos Pasha Vayishlach Yudalad Kislev Tafshin Yudalad, was that, and the Rebbe spoke at length about weddings and spoke there about customs, that there are two types of customs. And in the later years, the Frierdiker Rebbe began to reveal customs that were even concealed and not known. And once they're revealed to us, the Rebbe says that means they're relevant to us. Even though the Rebbe Rashab and other places says that some are not relevant, but because now it's been revealed to us, it's relevant to us. Just emphasizing even more the need to, I wouldn't use the word mimic, I would say this is the need to connect to the customs and the mannerisms of the Rebbe and the Rabbeim. To the point that we even there, it points out also about printing the invitations, the wedding invitation, which is a good example actually for this. The wedding invitation, even though our weddings begin not necessarily 5 o'clock in the evening, and the details, we actually print the invitation exactly it was printed by the Rebbe's invitation that the Frierdiker Rebbe prepared, saying that was also based on previous invitations with a precise language, which is another example of just having mitzad chfivas, the preciousness of doing something in the same spirit of the Rebbe, the Rabbeim. And the Rebbe addresses that as well in that Sikh in Yudal, Kislev Tafshin Yudal. Okay. Let's move on to another topic. The topic that questions have come in over years, since we began MyLife. We're now in episode 95. So all the way from the early on, there were questions regarding this topic, and finally decided to take all these questions and put them together and begin to address this fundamental issue, and that's the issue of hair covering. Why does a married woman have to cover her hair? What is the source for this? Doesn't matter what kind of hair covering is used, a kerchief, hat, or shaitel, a wig. Is it appropriate to wear very attractive shaitels? Is covering the hair a way of making someone appear unattractive? Now, of course, this question is in context of a broader question of, in general, what's the Torah's view on hair? And you see a certain type of focus that is more on hair than almost any other parts of the body in the context of the issue of the concern the Torah has, and even in contradictory ways. You have, as I mentioned, the married woman cover her hair. Yet on the other hand, before marriage, girls, the custom is that they don't cover their hair. And not only that, they wear their hair long. Boys, on the other hand, men on the other hand, always are told to wear their hair short. But they're not supposed to cut their facial hair, the payas and the beard. And after marriage, they don't cover their hair. Then you have, of course, the whole idea of upsharnish, for the first 3 years of a male, we don't cut the hair intentionally, and then there's a whole upsharnish tradition where we cut the hair. You have the Levim during the time of the Midbar were told to shave their heads every day. A Metzeder must shave his hair before he can be purified. A Nazir, on the other hand, is not allowed to cut his hair, and that was the power and the koyach of Shimshon Hagibur, because he was a Nazir. So you go on and on. You also have the Melech was supposed to shave his head every day, took a haircut every day, and you have others that you see constantly this focus on hair. Question is, what is this thing about hair? So I will try to begin talking about it and hopefully cover as much as I can in this episode. And a few specific questions going back, of course, with the focus on married women. Among the questions that came in were the following. Why is there still a stigma about wearing a tichel in Crown Heights? Especially if all the hair is covered and it's for something informal, for example, dropping your child off at the bus stop. Also, I hope this does not sound disrespectful, but I recently saw a video of the Rebbe during a deposition for the court case before Teives, and I wondered about the koch that the Rebbe made regarding married women making sure to cover all their hair all of the time. Seeing the Rebbe in that way made me question the validity of efforts to do so, and honestly made me feel I don't need to be as careful. Another question. Hi, Rabbi Jacobson. Firstly, your work is wonderful and amazing. Your tone is right on. I'm very passionate about getting married women to cover their hair. I know the Rebbe said it is a personal request of his. Therefore, I made a campaign over Gimel Tammuz to promote hair covering, asking women either for the first time or not to keep their hair covered through Shabbos. We did the campaign for a refuah shleim of a loved one. As the Arizal says, it's beneficial for your health. It was a big success and accomplished terrific awareness. However, there's much greater work to be done, maybe incorporating this learning into schools and such. Many of our younger women are opting to keep their wigs on a shelf, giving reasons such as this is uncomfortable as to why not to wear it. Another issue is that most of us have no idea why we cover our hair. Is it halacha or is it just a mitzvah? I'm not sure that the halacha or just a mitzvah. He probably meant just a minhag, probably just a custom. The women I've been in touch with are almost asking for a reason why they should cover their hair. I know the Rebbe has a psyche where he brings clarification as to what is halacha and what is a mitzvah. Many women know the source Gemara Seita or reference in the Chumash and Parshas Kerach, probably mean Parshas Nosei. And somehow they do not feel compelled to cover their hair. I believe the Alter Rebbe says it's halacha, but many will argue it isn't. Why is it so vague? Someone explained about how halacha is derived to in Das Yardus, Das Yehudis, but it still seems to be unclear. I can't really move forward with any of this if I remain ignorant. I know this is a very challenging mitzvah, which leads me to think that it must be extremely important and connected to the imminent Geula, which is why we have to get everyone on board. Can you please shed some light here? I am aware that you are not a woman. However, your program features plenty controversial topics. I also want to note that this question is coming from Avis Yisrael, my desire to work lovingly and respectfully to women. Okay, well, I commend you definitely for this effort, and I will do my best to address it the best possible way. Now, as usual, I've mentioned many times that I don't like to do halachic issues because this is not really the forum for it. But in this case, I made an exception, not because I'm going to just cover halacha, because in truth, to really appreciate the whole idea of hair covering, you need to have Primus HaTeira as well. The Zohar and different Sifrei Kabbalah, and of course Chassidus and the Rebbe's and the Rebbeim's explanations. However, obviously it all begins with halacha itself, and it's based on a pasuk in Parsha Nosei, Upora Esreisha Isha, where there during this the issue of a Seita, it says, Upora, you shall uncover the head of the woman. So Rabbi Yishmael, the Gemara in Ksubis, Daf Ayin Beis, that the original says, Rabbi Tana, the Rabbi Yishmael, that we learn from that women, Jewish women, do not go uncovered hair. And from there we have it derived in Shulchan Aruch, directly stated, just to give you the sources. Shulchan Aruch is in Eira Chaim Siman Ayin Hey, 75, in Eira Chaim, Torah Shulchan Aruch, and Torah Shulchan Aruch, of course, in Even Ezer, Siman Kuf Tezvav, as well as Siman Chof Aleph. So there you have the actual sources that anybody can go look up. This is plain halacha. Of course, there's discussion and the variations of how and the details of it, which I'm not going to cover here, obviously, because there's so many details involved. So clearly, this is a thing. If you need more information, find someone that knows the sources and can learn it with you, and you can look at the details. But the question is why? What is the reason behind it? That's what I want to address a lot more than the halacha is very clear. It states clearly. Now, it's interesting also to point out that it's about married women. So even though that in some places it says that Penuyas as well, which means an unmarried women, but it's made clear by the commentaries in Shulchan Aruch, especially Siman Chof Aleph, and there's actually a letter from the Rebbe that the Rebbe addresses it as well. In the letter is Aleph the Reish Chedesh Tammuz Tovshin Tezvav, Igros Chedesh volume 11, page 200. Where the Rebbe makes it clear that it's and bringing from Shulchan Aruch that it was not for unmarried women, psulis, only for married women, and as far as those that stated, even though there were some Sephardic countries where they followed it, but generally speaking, that's not the way it is, as the Rebbe says. Here he brings it, minhag hapsulis meder leder. We see it very clearly that it's not the case, and especially in Sifri on that pasuk in Nosei, the zeicher b'mikra, you could even. It's even hinted to in that verse, because that verse is talking about a married woman, not an unmarried woman in Nosei, by the Satan. Okay. And the Rebbe brings in this letter, he says, what's the distinction? Why? This is still nigla. We'll soon get into the deeper discussion of it. So he says the reason is, because Kisei Areish, one of the reasons for it is as a punishment for the Chet Tzadas, for the eating from the tree of knowledge. And that was in the case where Chava essentially incited Adam. And that's why you don't have the idea of covering for someone who's not married, because the whole issue was because of her marriage to Adam, and she's the one that caused it. That's what the Rebbe says. Yeshlemer is the primius hatam al pinigla. Okay, you can look it up in the letter and for more details. But however, the question that I posed earlier, which is the general picture of hair in general, that's what really needs to be addressed if we want to really understand what the power of hair is, and so on. So we need a few introductions, and then I'll give a few sources, and I'll explain them as well. Most important introduction that needs to begin, which is what I think many people misunderstand, or that's why they don't understand the significance, that people think, what's the big thing? You have hair in your head. You didn't cover it as a girl, so what's the big thing? So you're covering it. Why is that such a significant thing? So firstly, we have to remember that the human being was created in the divine image. Every part of our body, from head to toe, is created in the image of the divine. It's not negligible. It's not like it doesn't really matter how you dress or how you do this. Everything is calculated. Here, in particular, has a certain type of reflection of divinity. And once you know that, then everything takes on much more significance. So it's not just who really cares. Now, in Kabbalah and Chassidus, it talks at length about the power of hair as being Sidus, as being Meishrei Meichen. Sidus, let's start with the sidus that grow on top of the head. Then you'll see hair grows wherever there's a lot of energy. The head, of course, has the most energy. In certain sexual areas of the body, hair grows as well. Hair grows where there's a lot of energy. Because why? Because hair resembles what Kabbalah and Chassidus says is a type of channels. Think of it like wires. Hair is like wiry. It's thin strands that bring down very powerful energy in a very limited Tzimtzum way, in a very constrained way. So Cyrus and Kabbalah talk about a very high level. For example, the Pasuk in Daniel. So it says, Atik came in Yosef al-Kursaya, the one of old years. Atik came, and of course, if you're familiar with Kabbalah, is the highest level in Shtalshlus, in the cosmic order, the highest level. Atik came in, the one of ancient years, Atik. And it says, his garments are like white, like snow. V'resheh, on his head, is ka'amar naka, is like white hair, like linen. So you hear from Amr in Aramaic is like hair. So what do you have here? That the idea of hair refers to the highest hamshachas that come from the highest levels, and they drawn down from, because they're such a high level, they can't be drawn down in expansiveness, so they're drawn down in a very narrow way. So here reflects drawing down energy from very deep place, and that will explain many of the contradictions in the different aspects of hair, as I'll explain in a moment. But first, let me give you the sources for it. What I'm describing now is coming from a few number of Maimorim. Firstly, let's go back to the covering of hair itself. Is very powerful parts of what it's all about is based on Zohar. Zohar Chelik Beis, Samach Amud Beis. Zohar Chelik Gimel and Parsha Nosei, Take. 126a, that's Kuf Chavov Aleph. And Erachama, the commentary there. The Alter Rebbe in Lekutei Torah, Vayikra 24a, 32a, Dvorim 36c, Biyurei Azeh of the Mittler Rebbe in Parshas Azriya 69c, Eira Teira Nach, page 767, and Derech Mitzvah Mitzvah Tigalachat Mitzera 104b. And then there's some more sources which I'll refer to in a moment. Now, what does it say there? Let's start with the Tigalachas Mitzera, which is based on the Lekutei Torah. He says, you see in here two contradictions. You see these contradictions all the time, this paradox. On one hand, you see the power of hair, the need to grow it by a Nazir and by Shimshon, as I mentioned. Then you see that here that you cut. You're supposed to cut by the Mitzera. And then there's the need to cover hair by a woman. And the answer to all of it is because hair is tremendous power. In simple language, it's sexual energy. Sensual energy. And you see it even in basic advertising. Look around in advertising and they advertise, especially when they different products, and they have a woman model. Hair always plays very prominent. It has sensual energy. That doesn't mean it's bad. It simply means it has a lot of energy. Because as I've discussed a number of times, sexuality from a Jewish point of view is not bad. It's just powerful. And power has to be regulated, has to be controlled, or else it can overwhelm and control us. So therefore, here absolutely has power. That's why you see Shimshon HaGibur, you see the Nazir. There's something about here that has strength. What's the strength? Because it's drawing down from very great places energy. On the other hand, because it has so much strength and it's coming down in a very narrow way, in a way it's very vulnerable to abuse. And that's why Sar Be'isha Erva. That's why you say that here on a woman is Erva. Erva is, again, not a negative, a lot of energy. Now, why by a woman more than a man? Because a woman, yes, she manifests sexuality more than a man in many ways, and therefore her hair has more power than a man's hair. On the other hand, you do have a man coming to payas and a beard. You do have that also as well. The Hamshach of Yud Kimel Tikkun Dikna and the strands, as I said, also powerful energy. But that type of energy that the woman has, a man does not have. Now the question is, if that's the case, so why women before marriage don't cover their hairs? So there's another fascinating letter from the Rebbe, again very brief. This is a letter printed in letters in Tezvav Elul Tavshin Yud Zayin, where someone asked this question to the Rebbe. Tezvav Elul Tavshin Yud Zayin. It's printed in Likutei Sichos, volume 23, page 1348, as well as the Igros Kodesh of the Rebbe, volume 15, page 415. Okay, so the Rebbe has asked the question, exactly this question. Since you see that the hair has so much power, and by a nazir you're supposed to not cut it, so by a woman, you should shave it off completely, and not satisfied just by covering it. If it has so much power, why not shave it off completely because of its intense power? And the Rebbe says that from Al Pi Nigli, you'll understand Al Pi Primis Yanim. What does the Rebbe say? Which means, according to the technical reason, we'll understand the deeper reason. That you don't have it by women that are unmarried. Why? And also by married women, I should add, it's only for those, the hair should be covered only for strangers. And only the part of the hair that is usually covered. You don't have to, for example, cover the hair that, say, grows on your hand. The light hair that's there. It's only the part, or eyebrows for that matter, etc. So why? But when it comes to her husband, a woman, especially when they're intimate, she shouldn't be, absolutely not have her hair covered. Hu bebigda v'hi bebigda is not acceptable. So the Rebbe says, on the contrary, a husband could even say, as the Gemara says, that I do not want to have, I'm repulsed by a woman that shaves her head. So the Rebbe says, from this we learn the Pnimius. Why? Because until a woman is married, she doesn't have, the sexual energy has not been released yet. So the hair is not yet, so to speak, needs to be protected. That's why a single woman does not need yet to have covering her hair. The Rebbe's words are, Yunika sechetzenim efshe shetia kishabah dover b'chlal yunika. If it doesn't yet have, which means it has to have the potential for it to be used in an inappropriate way. And that's only once the sexual so-called door has been opened. Once the sexual energy has been released, then that's possible. Mashenkin kishe'ena ela makabel. Whereas in the case where the woman is only a makabel, which can mean either she's a daughter, but she's not yet married, or a wife with her husband, there's no yunika there. Because they're meant to be together. Sexual energy is meant to be released at that point. That's why there's no covering. So the Rebbe then continues, however, that's why you cover it. Not because there's nothing wrong with the hair. On the contrary, the hair has a great power. What you want to do is regulate it in a way that it should not be misused, it should not spill over and give energy to negative forces. You could look that up as well in the sources that I just stated. The first letter, by the way, I mentioned was in the volume 11, page 200. It's also on the Likutei Sichos, volume 18, page 285. The same letter is printed there. Okay, so what do we have from all of this? We have from this is that hair is a complicated matter. It reflects a very high divine energy, but that comes down in a very narrow straits. So if it would come down with full protection, it would have a different type of approach. But once it has that type of intensity, at the same time it's coming down in a very limited way, that's why you have the different regulations and the different laws that are necessary to make sure that hair is used in the proper way and in an appropriate fashion. So that's briefly the content of that. Now, the Zohar that I quoted, the Rebbe brings in many letters, and of course also brings the Gemara in Yuma Daf Mem Zayin Amar Aleph about Isha Kimchis, that they asked her, she was zeichet to have 7 children, all of them were Kehanim Gedalim. Why was she zeichet? Because she said the walls of her house never saw her hair uncovered. And therefore this is the root of so many brachas. And the Rebbe brings from the Zohar, as well as an Emek HaMelech, also discusses at length, of the power much more than you find al Pinigla. And that's obvious because without Pnimius HaTeira, without the inner dimension of Chassidus, you can't really appreciate and understand it. It's a Gzeiras HaKosov, you could say. That's what the Teira says. Or you could say, we see hair can be alluring, and so on. But there's other parts we don't find that type of emphasis. And we also know that the Rebbe, even though there were different opinions on the matter, the Rebbe made it very clear that he wants people to wear a sheitel, practically speaking, because there's less nesoyin to take it off, whereas a kerchief and a hat don't have the same rigidity, so to speak. And quotes many times the Zohar how keeping their hair covered is the source for all the brachas for children and for health and for parnasa and so on. So this we can look up in the sources that I've cited. I just wanted to give the explanation for those of us that are not aware. Now this means basically your body is sacred, every aspect of you is sacred. It shouldn't be looked at as a burden. On the contrary, it looks at the beauty and the sensitivity of a person and every aspect of their human being. So imagine, even if your hair has such value, imagine how the rest of a person has to be valued. So it's really seeing the power and the value of who we are, and our both sensual and sexual power, in the sense of the intimate power of hair, and that's basically the foundation of it all, which also explains the issue that was asked about attractiveness. This is not about attractiveness. A woman should be beautiful, api halacha, and dress beautifully. God created Ein Isha Ela Yefi, or you could say that Ein Yefi Ela Benoshim is actually the right expression, that beauty was given to the domain of women. And as the Rebbe said once to the former beauty queen, Israeli beauty queen, went by the dollars, and the Rebbe said to her that, what do we say, Sheker Achein Vehevela Yefi means without Yiras Hashem, Isha Yiras Hashem Hi Tisalo. But when you have Yiras Hashem Tisalo, it infuses the beauty. And we see that in the Torah, it says Yifas Mari, Yifas Teir, Yifas Mara on the Imohis, on our matriarchs. So how could you say Sheker Achein Vehevela Yefi? Because that beauty inner beauty that also expresses itself in outer beauty. So absolutely you can wear a beautiful sheitel. It's not the beauty that we're discussing here. We're not talking about turning someone and making them look repulsive or making them look disgusting. God forbid, on the contrary. It's the power of the hair itself. That's why you can have a sheitel. And for some people, a sheitel is even nicer than their original hair. Because it's not the beauty. On the contrary. It's the power of the hair that actually grows from your head. That power, as it says in Kabbalah and Chassidus, as I mentioned, comes from the meichin. Means the hair grows through the skull. That means in ruchnius, in spiritual, it's coming from that high level of atik yemen, and that needs to be protected like the Holy of Holies. Why don't you enter into the Holy of Holies all year round? Not because there's something wrong. On the contrary, because it's so holy, and this dark world cannot be a keli, cannot be a container for it. So our hair, and as well as obviously the rest of our bodies, and especially the most powerful parts of the body, are the ones that need most, you could say, the most kfuda basmelach prima, the most inner dignity, because of their intense power. More superficial things don't need that much protection. Bacteria do not come to feed in places that are arid. They come to feed where there's a lot of nourishment, where there's a lot of energy. Wherever there's a lot of energy, positive energy, there always needs to be care that makes sure that it should not be abused and should not be in any way feed negative forces. So that's briefly it. I welcome your questions. This is a good opportunity to say questions can be posed at anonymously at meaningfullife.com/MyLife. Or if you want to write personally to me that I can be able to respond to you, because I can't respond to that forum, is simon@meaningfullife.com. Okay. And as I said, I believe I covered most of what I wanted to cover. I'm just looking here. Yeah. Let's move on to the next question. Chemistry and dating. How important is chemistry in dating and marriage? Should we be concerned if someone doesn't feel something for the other? Another writer writes the following. Please clarify. Can you please clarify what is the Rebbe's opinion on this matter? I've been on a date where I had this good feeling of nothing matters because I feel good being with this person. I equated that experience with having good chemistry, so I know the feeling and know it exists. On the other hand, I've been out with a person and thought I could make it work, but we don't have this element of chemistry, sparks, or that inner feeling of enjoying being around that person. People tell me that I shouldn't let the Hollywood version of romance influence my dating, but seriously, how much credence should be given to chemistry? Recently, I read in this book, Shidduch Secret, there's a point it brings out saying that chemistry is irrelevant if all else makes sense. Is this the right way to look at it, or is that book maybe only for other communities? What would you say the right way to go about it would be for someone trying to build a house based on the foundation of Torah and mitzvahs, and particularly the Rebbe's teachings? Okay. Well, I think chemistry plays a role, but let's put it in context. The Rebbe once told a young man who was a bocher who was dating, and he wanted to know whether he should continue dating. Not whether he should marry the woman yet, and he was ready. He just wanted the Rebbe's bracha to confirm it and to give the blessing. So the Rebbe said to him that on these matters of the heart, not your father can help you, not your mother can help you, not I can help you. There's an element in dating which absolutely needs some type of meshicha, halev. That means your heart responds to the other person, and that you relate to them. But I should qualify. This does not mean that sparks have to fly, and this does not mean love at first sight, because as we know, that takes time to develop. It means there is some type of resonance, some type of commonality that you relate to. If you don't relate at all to the other person in any way, that makes it questionable. However, placing it in context, you have to also remember that there are foundational elements. In looking for a shidduch, to put it simply, someone asked the Rebbe once, what's more important, intelligence or midas Teives? So the Rebbe wrote midas Teives. Vala kesev, the Rebbe added, and money, chazal b'chlal medabrim. Chazal altogether don't talk about. So it comes down to certain basic principles when you're looking for a shidduch, is finding a partner in life. And remembering what are your foundational principles in life. Finding a kind person, a person that's going to be your partner that you can trust, that you know whatever comes your way in life, you'll be able to deal with. That is what it comes down to, a person with midas Teives, with good midas, someone you can relate to on that level. Now, we don't know many things. Life takes on all kinds of twists and turns, and we can't anticipate every scenario when we're dating. But God blessed us with enough to know this person seems to be the right one for me. And together with B'tochen and the bracha of a Rebbe, that's how you solidify that. So chemistry has to be put into context in the sense it can be overdone, it can be underdone. The idea of chemistry that you find in many books and many of these different approaches actually really create more distortion than they're helpful. The chemistry is to be limited to the element of simply two people that can connect in that sense. And too much emphasis on it actually undermines the whole process. I've seen that many times. People say, I don't really feel that power. I don't feel that connection. You don't have to feel full connection. What you have to feel is that you don't feel repulsed. You don't feel disturbed. You don't feel anything that is seemingly wrong. I know that sounds a little minimal, because what do you mean? Just all I need is not to be repulsed? Yes, all you need is not to feel anything negative. If you feel something negative, it has to be addressed in yourself and others. Because remember, every human being has positives and negatives. Everybody has MyLife and Chassidus. Everyone has virtues and vices. If you're looking at someone, you don't really see their vices as being significant, that's a pretty good sign that there's something that connects the two of you. Because you could always rip anybody apart when you start putting them under the microscope. So I would say chemistry, not as an end in itself, as part of that picture where you have to have a sense of feeling for the person, a sense of, I'm not talking about not necessarily fireworks and this passionate sense. That comes with time, especially for mature adults who are not just caught up by a crush or by a juvenile infatuation. These things develop as time goes. As the Rebbe says, and I wrote it up in Torah Meaning for Life, the Rebbe told a young woman, love is not what's written in the books or you see in movies. Love is something that happens when two people commit to live their lives together and do the small things that are not dramatic. At some point you become inseparable. Think of love as the tree that grows out of seeds that are planted. So in the dating process, and especially in the early stages of a relationship, you're looking to find the seed. Can we have fertile ground where we can plant a seed together in the sense of building a home, building a partnership, like you say that Teives mitzvahs. And the foundations are the key. Knowing that what is your vision, what do you share, what is the reason that you think God sent you to this world, and does the other person have similar feelings? That's where that chemistry is most important. But if you take away those fundamentals and just talk about chemistry, you can go completely off. Then it becomes, okay, do you like to do this? Do you like to do that? She doesn't like to have as much fun as I like to have. That is a secondary thing to once the foundations are there. Now, it's important to have, obviously, to be able to enjoy each other. But as I said, foundations first, and with that, in that context comes any element of chemistry. Okay. Next question. What is your process of deriving advice from the Rebbe's answer to an individual while knowing that this advice was specifically geared to the recipient, not necessarily a universal directive? Okay, often I read letters in my life and derive advice or suggestions from the Rebbe, and the question is asking, don't we know from the Rebbe there's also a directive that what he writes to one person is not necessarily relevant to another person. It's Heira Pratis. It's a specific directive to that person. However, at the same time, we learn from the Rebbe, when the Rebbe writes even to one individual, you learn methodology. I always qualify and say it's case by case. That goes without saying, or has to be said, so I'm saying it again now. But at the same time, you can learn methodology. Even though you can't say that the Rebbe would necessarily answer exactly the same thing to somebody else, but you learn a methodology, and methodology can absolutely be applied to many scenarios. Now, of course, this needs training, and this needs discretion, and obviously, it's case by case as well. I cannot say every time the Rebbe says a directive, okay, right away apply it to someone else, but you get a general approach of the Rebbe, whether it's about dating, or it's about marriage, or about dealing with atzvus, depression or sadness or anxiety. There's a methodology. Now, of course, when it's a Heira Klolis, for example, the Alter Rebbe writes something in Tanya, or the Rebbe writes it in a way that you see clearly he's writing it more than for one person, then clearly you can derive from that. But everything has to be done with seichel, obviously. You don't just take a letter and say, okay, fit exactly, and say, do exactly what it says there. You have to take it, but you learn from methodology. I can't really tell you my entire formula. It comes from the years of experience, where you look at something and you see, can you use it? What elements of it can you use? And of course, you always make the qualification saying that there's also a possibility that some of these details may not be relevant to every individual. But that's how life is in general. Every human being is unique, and yet we have certain basic principles and methodologies that we can apply to anyone. Okay. One more question. What can I do to inspire my children to be passionate of what is important instead of nonsense? I'm terribly frustrated that my children are so distracted by things like internet, games, and sports. We're trying hard to raise them in a Chassidic environment, but these distractions are so pervasive today. What can I do to influence my children toward Chassidic hergation? Or to put it, the fundamentals. The single most important thing any parent can do is be a living example. It's not what you say, it's what you do. Ask yourself this question. What is, in an expressed, obvious, conscious way, what brings most excitement to you that you express at the table or in your home or to your spouse or to your children? Where do they see you being passionate? And if the answer is not in Chassidic things and not in the Rebbe's things, rest assured you've already given them an example of what they should be passionate about. So it's very good, it's very nice to say we love our children to be better than us. We love our children to put their hearts and souls into things that really matter. I'm not saying this, God forbid, to be critical. I'm just saying let's be realistic. If they don't see it in their parents, that they don't see that the most exciting thing for father and mother is my Chassidus, or a story from the Rebbe, or a nigun, they see it in other matters, even things that may not be forbidden, whether it be sports, whether it be how much they use their mobiles, how they are focused on technology or other things, or money and business. If that's what makes more excitement, and when you have more sadness when you lose money than when you don't understand the Chassidus, what do you think the children will pick up from the youngest of ages? So that's the first thing we have to do, is make sure that what we believe in should actually come into action. And you'll say, 1 second, but I don't really believe in that sports. I really believe in the Rebbe. But if children see that you jump up and down by a game, a football game, more than you do by anything else that comes from Chassidus, lahavdil, what do you think? Who cares what's going on in your heart? They see your actions, not your heart. That's number one. Number two is finding and uniquely chanech l'nara pidarke, customizing Torah and Chassidus and the Rebbe's inyanim to your particular child, tailoring it and looking for a way to excite, just like we look for ways to get our children excited about learning, and we find creative ways to do so. Find them to become excited about Chassidic things, about the purpose of why we're here, about the idea that the Rebbe gave each of us a shlichus, and that we have to fulfill it in our generation. Find the talents that your children have and try to align it and show them in a very fun way. It should be fun-loving, that they should be able to absorb and apply their skills and talents to the Chassidic objectives. Very often you'll find that children channel their talents and skills in other directions, and then there's also the Rebbe's inyanim, Chassidic inyanim, and so on. But that again is definitely a formula for compartmentalization, at put it mildly, if not worse. So those are two suggestions that come to mind. Now we have part 3 of the Chassidus question, and before I go there, I want to say one more thing about the covering of the hair, though I'm sure I'm going to speak about it in the coming weeks, but something came to mind as this developed. I want to say something on a personal note. I remember once that someone came to my class years ago. It was a young man. He came with his father. He was 16 years old, and he wanted to know why Chassidim wear black and white. He says, Chassidim wear black and white. I wasn't particularly wearing black and white. I wasn't Shabbos, but I was wearing a dark suit, and I was wearing a whitish shirt. And he said, why do Chassidim wear black and white? And because it seems so conformist, it seems so limiting, and so on, not expressing style. So I said to him, this is what came to me, and he reminded me 30 years later, because this happened over 30 years ago. I said to him, when astronauts go into space, do you ask questions why they wear this particular uniform? No, because they have a mission. And this uniform was developed over years to fit their mission. And if they try to waver from that uniform, it could be actually life and death issues. And I remember as a young man, he immediately says, that's amazing. He says, so you feel life is a mission. Yeah. That doesn't mean everyone wearing those garments or that uniform feels that way, but it means that's the reason. The idea that I mentioned before, that we were all created in the divine image, is not a small matter. It's how we see the human being and the value of a human being. Everything, from head to toe, literally, from the hair on top of our heads all the way to our toes. We are on a mission. And when you're on that mission, and you do it with a love and commitment to your mission, not out of obligation, then yes, the covering of hair becomes secondary to the mission. And if you know and learn Chassidus that hair has such power, even though you may not understand it, and then you realize this is the mission, this is the uniform we wear. And as I speak this for both men and women, men whether it's a yarmulke or a beard, women covering their hair in that way. I mean, whatever the different elements of this is about, it's about being on this mission, and you have the gift, the power, to be able to draw down energy from Atik Yemen. Atik Yemen is considered the highest of levels. Kesed is Atik, there's Arich. Atik is Netak, removed. It's considered to be the most transcendent of all levels. Transcendence, yes, transcendence. And what is sensuality and intimacy if not transcendence? So then when you look at it that way, you're entering into the Holy of Holies. And you see the Holy of Holies as being the special place where you are, spouses come together, in an intimate way, and then the blessings flow without any coverings. But then when you go back into a world that is not on the level of Atikim, not on the level of the Holy of Holies, then you cover simply because of the respect. And knowing there could be unique sachitzinim, there can be negative forces that glean energy from these most powerful places. I just wanted to add that element. Let me continue now, going back to the Chassidus question. It's already the third part. I haven't usually done this, but because this is such an elaborate discussion, so let me sum up what I've discussed and try to conclude in this episode. The question was about Tzimtzum Kipshute and perpetual creation. So in the previous two episodes, I discussed, number one, the different opinions on the matter and their lessons and relevance to our lives. What I want to talk about today is the Rebbe's Chiddush in this matter. And I began touching upon it, that in truth, the theory of Tzimtzum Kipshute makes more sense, and it was the Alter Rebbe who received from his Rabbeim otherwise, and that's why he absolutely negates it. But let's sum up firstly, what is exactly Tzimtzum? What is the Chiddush of the Arizal in Tzimtzum? So if you look in chapter 164 in Ayin Beis, volume 1, he talks about the Chiddush of the Arizal with the Tzimtzum Arishan, based on a Maimorim from the Tzemach Tzedek in Eira Teire in Yonim, which I don't have the page in front of me right now, but you can look it up in the index there. And what's the Vart? Like this. Before the Arizal, the Ramak, and other Mukabalim all saw Shtalshalus, meaning the divine order, cosmic order of how energy, divine energy, enters and creates an existence like ours. They saw it in the form of Ilah v'Alul, cause and effect, which means that there's something commensurate and something in common. But there was one major dilemma. God, in his essence, is absolutely nothing in common with our reality. We're creatures and God is a creator. Not only is God a creator, God is beyond even a creator. You can't even call him creator. So what do you do with that a dimension, so to speak, of the essence of God? So there were Kabbalists that basically relegated that's altogether beyond our reach. Yeah. There's an example in this agreement between the Ramak and the Rameh and the different Mukabalim, whether Keser is Ein Sof, and the Ramak held, no, it's not Ein Sof, because Ein Sof is beyond. Keser is already a dimension. Others felt, no, Keser is Ein Sof. And Samach Vav in Maimer Vayechi, which is also based on the Tzemach Tzedek's Maimer, and Alter Rebbe's Maimer, discusses this, as well as the chapter I just mentioned, 164, that all that means, so the two Mukabalim, they either come to that we don't really have a relationship with that essence of God, we only have a relationship with divine emanations that relate to us, or God relates to us, or and therefore what is relevant in the functionality of creation is the divine emanations. Or if you want to talk about the essence, we cannot really be who we are in our personalities and connect. So it's either we have to be compromised or we have a compromised relationship with the divine. And that was the only way Kabbalists could understand this, because there's nothing common between us and the God. Comes that Arizal's Mechadish Tzimtzum. What does Tzimtzum say? Tzimtzum says there's a radical quantum leap, a paradigm shift, where everything was turned inside out. Before the Tzimtzum, Elokus was B'Pshitis, all was divine. Then God created a Tzimtzum, and that Tzimtzum deals with, so to speak, you could say it deals with the balance. It balances out the equation of the infinite distance between us because of the Tzimtzum. So in a paradoxical way, Tzimtzum allows us to have a relationship with a God that's completely beyond us, because we understand that he needed a Tzimtzum, so to speak, for our purposes, to be able to create existence. So there were those that held that means literal. What does that mean? That God remains removed, and we are existence, and that's that. But the Alter Rebbe received that's not the case. He received from his Rabbeim, that's not the case. Tzimtzum is not kipshute. It means on the lowest levels of divine emanation, that's where the Tzimtzum affects. There's a concealment. But the core essence, altogether, there's no Tzimtzum. And even when there is the levels, there is a Tzimtzum, it's not literal. It's only a concealment, not a removal. Which means we fundamentally can have a relationship with the divine. But as I discussed in the last episode, that poses a whole bunch of questions and problems. It's far easier to go with the shit of the Mishnah's Chassidim Yesh Levov, that God is essentially removed. Now in that itself, that's where the Rebbe comes in, and as I said, starting from a letter in the year Tov Shin Chof Aleph. And I'm going to give you now the whole history of it. In Tov Shin Chof Aleph, the Rebbe writes a letter, Mitzat Kol Yochel, they felt that God can do whatever he wants. Therefore, he can remove himself and look at it like a king looks through a window at garbage. That's how God looks at this universe. And then that evolved as well through the years, where by the Suda of Shmini Atzeres, in Tov Shin Lamed Aleph by day, the Rebbe elaborated when the Rashag asked the Rebbe about Tzimtzum Kipshut. He says, on the contrary, it makes a lot more sense that way. But the Alter Rebbe was received otherwise, and that's why he explained it that way. The Rebbe also says that because the Alter Rebbe said, if you want to go with Seichel, because the Yesh Levov wants to explain it with intelligence you can argue the other way around. And how could you make, if you're going without intelligence, that's how God wants it, so be it. He detached himself in his infinite, possible, capable way of doing so. And that's why the Alter Rebbe gives a whole explanation in chapter 7, that you can't say that's the case after he received otherwise, and then of course he explains it. But the explanation is a lot more complicated because now you have to account for a big issue here. It's not just the divine leap, the quantum leap of the Arizal. Now, how do we have a relationship if the essence of the divine and even the revelations of the divine are fundamentally here and accessible? It's much easier to explain it all, as I discussed in the previous episode. Now, in the evolution of this, in the Sikh of Ekev Tov Lamed Aleph, the Rebbe again referred to it, and then Matis Maseh and Devorim Tov Shin Mem, which I personally had the schus, it was the first year I started writing officially Hanochas, is when the Rebbe said then for the first time, he said then about this Maseh, he said the following. He said that which it says, that the perpetual creation, that the Rebbe brought about from chapter 2 in Tanya, where he completely negates, he says they're literally apikursim, apostates who say they compare existence to creating something from another thing. So it doesn't need to have the creator within it. Whereas where existence ex nihilo means yesh ma'ayin, needs to have constantly the ayin to energize the yesh. And the Rebbe brought that in one same breath as he spoke about in chapter 7, where he also says, not like those that make the mistake, Tzimtzum k'pshutei. And the Rebbe used the same language. So we asked the question to the Rebbe, and Shabbos Devarim, Chazain, Tov Shemem, the end of the Fabring was a Fabring that went till almost 8 o'clock at night. The Rebbe spoke a whole hour, almost an hour, 55 minutes on this topic, and explained at length the discussion that there's two separate things. Chapter 2 in Shayach Rimon is talking about the weakness of God, meaning they compare existence that doesn't need a God. Whereas in chapter 7, it's coming from the Kol Yochel, the greatness of God, that he's so great that he can remove himself. So it's a very different reason. One is because God is not capable or is not interested. The other is because of his greatness, not because of his comparing him, God forbid, to Tachbulis, Tachbulis in Enesh, meaning the actions of human beings. So what you have is a powerful element and that's when the Rebbe elaborated and actually brought the two opinions, whether those that hold that Tzimtzum k'pshutei, will they hold that God would create existence anew. So in a letter in the Rishim of Hashgacha Prat is the famous one in the end of Chelik Ches, in the volume 8 in Likutei Sichos, and also printed now in Igros Kodesh. There the Rebbe says that B'Pashtus, if they hold Tzimtzum k'pshutei, then they can be holding that the God is constantly renewing existence because he removed himself. But the Rebbe said there's another way you could say that he does continue to energize, but not with Atzmus, is not involved. It's only Hashgachosei. It's God's like watching through the window. That watching is what recreates existence again and again. There the Rebbe also said it's possible, and this is what the Rebbe began many times explaining over the mems, that it's very possible also that God could invest in existence a power that should give it energy to continue on for whatever amount of time God wants existence to be, and he does not need to renew it. And this also, the Rebbe explained, is the same thing. The same thing is, but the only reason it's not that way is because the Alter Rebbe was received from his teachers not that way. Now, obviously, receiving from the teachers, the way we learn it, the involvement and relationship of the unity between us and the divine is far deeper. But it could have been the other way. And the Rebbe insisted on that. As hard as it was to accept, the Rebbe kept insisting on it. Then, Parsha De'ei Tov Shin Mem, that same year, the Rebbe again spoke about it. Then Shavuos and Nosei Tov Shin Mem Gimel, Vayakel Tov Shin Mem Vov, Kedoshim Tov Shin Mem Tes, where the Rebbe adds even that you don't even have to say Hulavadi, you could say that God, that even the Yesh is not necessarily has to come from Atzmus. And Ba'aleischa Tov Shin Nun Aleph. I'm sure there's some more, but these are the basic ones that address this topic. And as you see, in the later years, this became more and more prominent. And the idea that it's actually possible. Now, what lies behind it? Why was the Rebbe insisting on this? Besides the fact that obviously God is not bound by our logic, because at the end of the day, it gives us an ability to relate to the divine that's even beyond our rationale. The Alter Rebbe manifested it in a rational explanation. But the fact that there's so-called a possibility, which means that in concept there is a level like that God did not need to create a tzimtzum. And Kol Yochel in his omnipotent ability, he was able to create existence that could just go on without constant renewal, tells us that there's a dimension of the divine, a shaloi be'erech. In other words, the Tzimtzum Kipshute in some way gives us a more infinite distance of the divine than the opinions that Tzimtzum is not Kipshute. Even though the Arizal came to explain that and balance the equation, so to speak, or account for the infinite distance, but the infinite distance of Tzimtzum not Kipshute is seemingly not as infinite as the infinite distance of Tzimtzum Kipshute. So in a way, the Rebbe introducing that gives us back that taste of a certain awe, because at the end of the day, it's beyond us all. And yet God chose that it should be in a way that He wants to manifest and relate to us. I shall elaborate on this more in the next episode, even though I believe I've covered it now, and I hopefully covered enough. There's plenty more to talk about, but suffice for now. Let me go over briefly to the essays, MyLife essays. So we have, again, 3 essays, starting with first one, Facing Difficult Situations by Meir Nu, age 29, rabbi in Crown Heights. The essays can be seen. You go to MyLife, meaningfullife.com/MyLife. And you go there, you look, and /contest, I believe, you'll be able to find it and look around for it, or you could look in the search to be able to find where these essays are. And you read all the essays, and as well as if you subscribe to our weekly newsletter, we send them out every week. So this essay begins. This essay is not a lesson on how to face difficult situations, rather it is an observation of the mechanics of working through difficult situations. And basically, it goes through how a person, very interesting application of tzaddik and beinoni, the 2 modes that help us deal with the transitions in of our lives, where we begin, a person is born, they go about their life passionately, and then we lose, for some reason, some of that passion. And he talks about is how a person can, by understanding the tzaddik and beinoni balance, and understanding, as the Alter Rebbe says, that a Beinoni must accept that maybe he was created to struggle, that itself gives us the ability to reconnect to that passion, and that's what makes Chassidus so unique. So that's essay number 1. He has a suggestion for action at the end about learning Chassidus that gives us the ability to not lose that connection, and that connection is critical, as I said, to finding meaning in life and maintaining it throughout a person's lifetime. Okay. Essay number 2 is Discovering Reality for Fun by Shlomo Chaim Kesselman, age 20, a Montreal Bocher and Zal, come originally from Joburg, South Africa. And here it says, lots of children are afraid of growing up. Maybe they've been influenced too much by J.M. Barrie, and maybe they have particularly unimaginative parents. But their fear isn't unfounded. Somewhere between the rapid development of childhood, the chaos of adolescence, and the wonder of becoming independent, humans find safe nesting spots in the tree of life and prefer to stay there. Goodbye excitement and change, hello dreary offices and tax returns and ungrateful children. He says that this issue is so subtle that most won't recognize it within themselves, yet there is hardly a person who isn't afflicted. And he goes into a new discussion. He says the Chassidic dictionary gives new meaning to the word grown-up, which means something vastly different than what Peter Pan thought. Through understanding that self-improvement doesn't end with when one reaches 30, that it's only possible but necessarily we can find more happiness and fulfillment, and that it's not only possible but necessary we can find more happiness and fulfillment in our lives. And he goes on to speak about the Tanya as well, Mashbir Neisei Tehi Tzaddik, and how a person, by recognizing that as much as they grow, there's so much more to grow, takes on a whole new standard of what growth really means, and so on. He speaks about how every person has both positive and negative traits, and the more you understand the deeper parts of yourself, the more you're able to connect to a certain dynamic element that keeps, as he puts it, the constant work needed to transcend negative character traits is an exercise which keeps us younger, just like physical activity does for the body, and through toiling towards self-refinement, we can be grown-ups who never stop growing. Okay, well written and well done. Essay number 3 for this week is Vitality is Movement by Mali Nu, Mechon Bina student, age 19, Crown Heights. Doing what's right versus doing what's fun. This sentence just about sums up the issues and difficulties a person faces in his internal struggle to serve Hashem. There's that which is true and proper, keep Torah mitzvahs, but isn't enjoyable, versus that which is enjoyable and exciting, yet wrong. In this essay, I will resolve this issue based on 2 fundamental Chassidic concepts. A, a true definition and understanding of the term bittul, nullification, and B, Hashem's infinite, intimate love for every single Jew. These ideas are based on the most fundamental ideas taught by Chassidus and lay the groundwork upon which one's entire life shall be built. So first, by negating the distorted the interpretation of bittul as being self-nullification, explains that bittul, based on Derech Mitzvah, she explains bittul is based on actually actualizing the real you and getting rid of the false you. So that, number one, changes the whole perspective that you're not giving something up, you're actually discovering yourself. And using the example of the Meraglim. And then, citing the story of the Shmuel Munkus, and he told the Alter Rebbe that if you're a Rebbe, you shouldn't be worried about being arrested, and if not, you deserve it because you took away Elam Hazar from so many people. So she asked why. What we see from this, taking away pleasure is only a problem if he's not the real Rebbe. But if he's a real Rebbe, it's fine. Why? Because the real Rebbe who teaches real Teives Chassidus does not take away pleasures. He actually replaces the pleasures with deeper, truer enjoyment of being the real you. Very nice take on that story. The second component is solving the issue of Hashem's love for every Jew, which means that essentially, she quotes from a letter from the Rebbe, Igros Kodesh, volume 4, page 220, about how every Jew has a special quality that the Eibishter wants in them. So when you learn that concept, it helps you recognize that the real you is what's loved, and it's not about giving something up. So then the challenge is, how do you make Yiddishkeit fun? That's where I would have liked to see in this essay continue going. Okay, tell us now how you make Yiddishkeit as fun as many things that we consider to be not fun, but not necessarily consistent with Yiddishkeit. But well done as well. And those are the essays. So with that, we will conclude now. This has been MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 95, every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. Please send us your questions. Everyone should have a blessed week. Should be Yehof Chiyam Meil L'Sosun L'Simcha L'Moedim Tevim Chazak Vazak V'Nis Chazek. At the end of the Sefer Bereshis, we should go into the Chazak of the Gula Amitis V'Ashlema. So until next Sunday, everyone be well. Thank you.